Hello, my name is Tatiana Ryshova and I am a lecturer at National Research University Higher School of Economics, and today we're going to have another webinar on feedback that us language teachers give to our learners as a process of assessing their performance and more specifically assessing their writing. And today we are going to talk about final comments that we leave on our students' writing after conducting its assessment. If you remember, in our previous videos, we talked about different principles of delivering feedback to our learners and different features of effective feedback, and I would like you to think right now to yourself what these features are. What are the features that make our feedback particularly effective, that make our feedback serve an important tool that we can use to motivate our learners, to encourage them, to teach them, instruct them, correct their learning strategies and the actions that they take when developing their language skills and acquiring new material. So as for the features of effective feedback, we can name the following. Well, first of all, feedback should be encouraging. Through our feedback, we motivate our learners. We want to let our learners know that we're there for them, that we're there to facilitate their learning. We're there to assist them and to support them, and whenever they have any difficulty, we are there to help them, and their learning actually matters to us. At the same time, feedback should be honest. We should not give praise to our learners if there is for something that does not deserve praise. We should not mislead our learners by saying this is a great piece of work if in fact it is not, if in fact we understand that our student maybe didn't put enough effort into making that the way it should be. We should find that balance between being polite, respectful, supportive, and at the same time genuine and honest, because we want our learners to be aware of where they are at the moment on the scale, let's say, of their, which might represent their learning, right? We must let them be aware of what their actual strengths and weaknesses are, and we therefore might develop actually their autonomy, their learners' autonomy, which is very important in the modern world and in the modern approach to education and learning. Teaching and learning. Our feedback should be well balanced, so there should be something, there should be some bits which are actually the highlights of the strengths of our learners' work. There should also be some constructive criticism, well, if you remember, well, there is actually a very common metaphor used when talking about any kind of feedback that people might deliver to other people. It's a little sandwich, right? So we might want to start with something positive. We might include some constructive criticism somewhere in between, and we might wrap it up with some positive or like encouraging comment, right? I mentioned that feedback should be constructive, but what does it mean constructive? Well, constructive means intended to help. Instead of just saying what's bad about this or that piece of work, we should not only just state that or describe, but we should actually maybe offer some action plan, right, of how this might be turned into the way our student, let's say, written piece of work, what can be done to improve it. A little action plan and feedback, well, constructive feedback, very often specific feedback, right? So actually the fact that our feedback is specific contributes to it being constructive, right? Instead of leaving just very general comments like poor grammar or good job, we might actually focus on what is good in particular or what needs improving in particular. If we say that the grammar is poor, then what the problems are. Like grammar is a very general term, right? We don't want to overwhelm our learners, especially if there are a lot of problems in this or that piece of writing. So we might want to keep our feedback selective, right? Instead of commenting on every single thing in every single piece of writing, we might actually select just a few features of the writing from 2 to 4 research suggests and focus on them in our feedback. And feedback should be personalized. Our learners should not have this feeling that we did not put much thought when working with their piece of writing, that we actually approach them and their learning personally, and we care about them and their success and the progress that they make. So how do we make our feedback personalized? Well, first of all, we can keep it specific, right? We might leave feedback in a form of a little message, which, well, a personal message in which we might address our learner by name, we might write our name, we might use some nice, well, conventions of a little message from a personal message from one person to another. We might saying thank you, or when giving suggestions, we might actually, well, saying please, I would highly appreciate, and well, we might want, or we might also make our feedback personalized by linking what we're commenting on in a certain piece of feedback with our learners' prior knowledge. So we can say that, look, in terms of this like much improved, right? But this is still something we should focus on. So we might also comment on their progress, right? We might let our student know that we're tracking, that we can actually track their learning and their progress, and whatever, like their performance matters to us as teachers. Therefore, we can create this amazing and very effective environment in which we can deliver our message to our learner, and this message can be perceived, right? So, because if learners do not feel that support, they might put up that invisible barrier, right, between us and them, and therefore it's really very hard to communicate when this barrier exists. And feedback is, well, a way to establish that rapport through which we can exchange, well, information, right, and help our learners improve. Another very important aspect of effective learning, which we haven't talked before in the course of this little webinars devoted to the topic of teacher feedback, is that feedback should be linguistically correct. This is a very important issue, especially when it comes to teachers who are not native speakers of English, and sometimes we are human, and this is not our first language, and sometimes we do happen to make little errors in our speech. It's okay. There's no remedy that will help us to get rid of them completely, but we should always be aware of the fact that language that we our language, that we expose our language, our learners to, serves as a model of the way our learners might use target language in their real life. And we just really should make sure that we do not make mistakes in our language, or at least we keep them to the minimum, and we try to make like the language that we use when communicating with our learners. Well, obviously I'm talking about target language, I'm talking about English. When we use English as a means of communication with our learners, as natural as possible and virtually error-free. Today we are going to talk about little commentary, final comment that we write at the bottom of the page with a piece of writing after marking it, as a genre, as a professional genre of the target language that teachers use in their professional life. And in front, on this slide, you can see the guiding principles of how to deliver, how to write comments on, final comments on student writing, and they basically reflect the features of effective feedback, right? You can see that in our comments we should try to provide our learners with some encouragement, and at the same time with some constructive criticism. We should be selective, and we do not have to respond to every single problem with their writing, right? Because not only can it demotivate and overwhelm our learners, but it can also actually, well, deter them from focusing on the real problem areas that require urgent well, solution, right? And urgent work on them. We should avoid appropriating. Now, this is something that we touched upon in our previous videos, especially when talking about reformulation as one of the strategies to correct linguistic errors in our learners' writing. Now, appropriating means basically taking over our learners' text when we help them to improve their language, and without, well, meaning it, we might actually start changing their ideas and distorting what our learners were trying to say or write. So this is something that we should try to stay away from. One of the tips on how to ensure that we do not take over our learners' text might be staying away from overcorrection. Whenever you well, raise your hand to correct this or that mistake in our learners' writing, always ask, okay, but is it truly incorrect? Or is it me just wanting to introduce another way of saying the very same thing, but I just like this way better, right? So if it is possible to keep that bit of writing the way our learner wrote it, we try to do that. We do not want to overcorrect. And obviously, we should always make sure that we're not changing their ideas when introducing more natural and more correct ways of formulating, well, yeah, their thoughts. And again, feedback, as I have already mentioned, we should aim at keeping, well, our feedback keeping that, maintain that ongoing conversation between us and our learners, and feedback is basically an important part of this conversation. So we might leave a message, we might then see how our learner understood what we were trying to tell them in our previous message, and we might actually comment on it in our subsequent well, comments, right, and pieces of feedback that we leave to our learners, right? Again, link to their previous experience, link to your previous feedback. Now, we are going to use the features of effective feedback, which we talked about in our previous videos and have been talking about right now, as little assessment criteria, and we're going to have a look at some examples of final comments that teachers left on the pieces of writing of their learners, and we will try to actually use those features of effective feedback as a little checklist. I will give you 40 seconds to look at this comment that a teacher left to their student George after assessing their essay, argumentative essay, and try to think which of the features of effective feedback which of the criteria of effective teacher feedback it meets. So I'll give you about 30-40 seconds to look at this example of teacher feedback. So basically the comment is, George, I like the arguments you provide to support your point of view, yet I would omit the paragraph where you introduce ideas that contradict your position. Keep working on your grammar. Too many errors. Grade C-. Now, obviously, it's hard to evaluate this feedback without having a look at the actual piece of writing to which this example of feedback refers, but we will try to look at the form of this feedback, right? At the way it is worded. So, do you think this feedback is honest? Now, obviously, it's hard to tell without having a look at the actual piece of writing. What we can say is that this comment looks quite positive and respectful, and while the teacher does highlight some problematic areas, right? For example, the fact that there are too many mistakes, so it might be quite honest, it might not, it's hard to tell for sure, but what we can say for sure is that it does look personalized, right? Because our teacher addresses the learner by name, George, and there is a little message, right? Keep working on your grammar, right? A little, imperative, which still looks quite nice. It does look like quite personal message, right? And a part of an ongoing conversation. It is error-free. I would not say that there are any language mistakes in this comment. The only thing is that I would actually omit that comma after yet. Other than that, it looks quite error-free. And again, if we're talking of teacher comment, right, as the real model of the language that we introduce our learners to, we might not want to put an exclamation mark over here, but rather a comma. So, because this is just a more natural way of writing personal messages and letters in the English language, just a general convention of writing personal letters. Does this feedback look well balanced? Well, there is a positive comment, right? A comment on the content of this piece of writing, and there is some criticism, right? Criticism about the content. The teacher gives a suggestion that there should not be a paragraph with the introduction of some ideas which contradict the position of the learner. Well, we might not know what the reasons behind that are, but the teacher gives some, criticism on the content of this piece of writing, right? And the teacher states that there are quite a lot of, actually too many mistakes in this piece of writing. Too many might be a bit too strong and demotivating, but still, the teacher does highlight the positives and the negatives of in this piece of writing, though this feedback does not look quite selective, because selective and specific. Well, in the first place, it is not specific, right? Comments like keep working on your grammar are not very helpful, right? Are not constructive because they're not specific. So what does it mean I should work on my grammar? Well, thank you. That's quite obvious, right? A lot of language learners do have to work on their grammar, and it's like a problem area for most language learners. It's quite, it's probably one of the most difficult aspects of language learning, right? So it is not quite specific, not selective, because a teacher tried to like, with just one sentence, too many mistakes, cover pretty much everything. Maybe it could be more effective to focus on specific areas, right, that need being worked through after working, well, on this, or as a part of working on this particular piece of writing, right? Maybe some specific mistakes need more attention, right? Specific attention in this piece of writing. So we can say that it might be honest. Looks like it is honest. It is well balanced, right? Could be maybe better, but positives and negatives are highlighted. It is not quite constructive, not very selective, not specific, but personalized, and almost error-free, right? A couple of, well, questions in terms of punctuation, but generally it is error-free. Let's have a look at another example of a teacher comment, and I'll give you again 30-40 seconds to look at it. All right, the comment is, respect the number of words. The original text had 210 words, so I had to reduce it. It was written from an adult's perspective, but the question is it better to have older parents? So I rewrote it as if a young person was answering. Now, does this comment look personalized? No, it does not. It looks just very detached, right? Definitely does not look like a part of an ongoing, supportive, encouraging conversation between a teacher and a learner. Does it look honest? Well, it does look quite honest, right? Basically, mainly negative aspects of the essay are touched upon. It does not look well balanced, right? Can you see anything, any praise or any highlights of the strengths in a piece of writing? Now, it does not really look like a sandwich, if you remember, right? And in one of our previous videos, we mentioned, and you mentioned, that even if a piece of writing does not clearly live up to the standard, more likely there is something good we can like, that we can refer to, right? To start off our feedback with something positive, or at least we can comment on the progress, right? But there is definitely no balance. It does not look quite constructive, because from this feedback it seems like the teacher did all the work for the learner. So they reduced the number of words, they rewrote some bits of the essay. Is it helpful? Does it promote learning? I'm not quite sure. And even if you have rewrote something, why would you write about it in your comment? That is probably quite clear that you've rewrote some bits of the text in the comment. It might actually be a better idea to comment on why you decided to rephrase these or that bits of writing, right? Again, it does not look quite personalized. Is it free? Error-free? The original text had 210 words. Can a text have 210 words? I strongly doubt it. You better use the structure, there is the ra, right, when commenting on the number of words. So there are 210 words in this piece of writing, or this piece of writing, the original piece of writing was of 210 words, so I had to reduce, right, the number of words in your essay. So that's one of the inaccuracies, right? I do not I'm not quite sure if there should be a comma after so, and actually I suggest that you are very careful, because what I've seen quite a lot of times when looking at teacher feedback as a part of assessing language learners' piece of writing, that sometimes teachers might write something, so. It is not a good idea to start sentences with so. Well, very often when assessing learners' writing, we might let our learners know that so is not a very good way of starting a sentence. Then we probably should not in a more formal, right, pieces of writing. So this is probably something that we should not use in our pieces of writing either, right, because otherwise there is this little contradiction going on. Let's have a look at another piece of writing, another example of teacher feedback as a part of assessing, delivered to a student as a part of assessing their writing, and again you have about 1 minute to read it carefully. And so the feedback is, dear Michael, this is a decent attempt at the question. You've covered most of your points, but the bit where you acknowledge the reception of the letter is missing. You should pay more attention to the language accuracy. We usually say to give something to somebody. There is a spelling mistake, right? Smith, something to somebody. And in formal writing, it is more advisable to start your requests with, could you please? The last sentence is not very clear. Did you mean the bus stop is 2 minutes away from the business center? I'm looking forward to reading your makeover, Maria. Now, this is a totally different example of teacher feedback, right? Is it error-free? Well, it is. I would say that it is error-free, apart from this little spelling mistake in something, right? Not Smith, but something. Probably it's just a typo, right? Is it personalized? Well, yeah, it is personalized. It does look like a personal message from a teacher whose name is Maria to our learner whose name is Michael. It's very respectful. We can see dear Michael, right? And it does look like a natural piece of writing, like a natural message from one person to another, right? So it can actually serve, on top of it being feedback, right, as a nice model of a written message that learners might stick to and follow when writing messages to somebody else in their further learning and experience of using English as a means of communication, right? Is it well balanced? Well, it clearly is, right? The feedback starts with a little comment on the positive aspect of this writing, which is comment, right? You covered most of the points, and there is some comments on something that could be done better or could have been done better, right? And some suggestions of how this piece of writing can be improved, right? You should pay more attention to the accuracy, and there are actually some ways of reformulating, right? Some reformulation makes part of this final comment, right? And if you have a look at this first paragraph, right, when the teacher does comment on a little drawback, right, to the content of this piece of writing, they actually make it, teacher whose name is Maria, she makes it in the form of a little suggestion, right? The bit where you acknowledge the reception of the letter is missing. So it does look like, well, some criticism, but again, in the form of a it's very specific and it is clear how it can be improved, right? Just don't forget to acknowledge the reception of the letter, write about it, and your content or structure will be better. It is quite selective, right? And it is very specific. Again, generally the content is good, but don't forget about, instead of writing, not all conventions of writing a letter are followed. Now, what are the conventions that are not followed? What is that convention? The fact that you should acknowledge the reception of a letter, right? Or you should pay more attention to language accuracy, and then the teacher elaborates on what in particular should be paid attention to, right? We should say give something to somebody, right? And it is advisable to start your request with could you please? Not something like you should work on your language more, right? So quite specific, personalized, and almost error-free. Now, these can serve as a nice examples of teacher feedback, and we have a couple of more. Another example of teacher feedback, you have again about a minute to, this one is quite short, so probably even 30 seconds to look at this one. So the feedback is, do not start sentences with also but, repeat present simple, period. Many repetitions, modern medicine, 10 times, consider carefully your ideas. Now, is this feedback honest? Well, probably it is. Is it well balanced? Again, there are no strengths highlighted, right? It does not look positive, right? There is nothing positive in that comment, so it is not well balanced and focused only on negative aspects of the written work. Is it constructive? I strongly doubt that. Do not start sentences with also and but. But why? Should we never start sentences with also and but? No, we can start sentences with also and but in more informal pieces of writing. So this is something that is important to be mentioned, right? Because the message, we should always think of the message that our learner receives as a result of the feedback which we deliver to them, right? So do not start sentences with also and but. Our student may just remember that never ever should they start sentences with also and but. Repeat present simple. What does it mean, repeat? When we receive an instruction, repeat present simple, the natural reaction of a learner will be present simple, present simple, present simple. What does it mean to repeat? To repeat means to say something again, right? So this is actually a mistake. What should be said, what is the verb that should be used instead, or that should have been used instead? Revise, refresh in your memory, brush up, right? But definitely not repeat. It's obviously a false friend, but it means a totally different thing in the English language, right? So, and even if we say repeat, well, repeat present simple, it is maybe more or less specific over here. We at least outline the problem area, right? The learner has not practiced present simple enough. What does mean revise? Is it helpful to just to revise? We should think of how this comment, this particular bit of this comment might be made a bit more constructive, right? Many repetitions, modern medicine, 10 times. Well, this teacher obviously did put effort into counting how many times modern medicine was used. Instead of that, I would actually maybe ask a learner, can you please next time, before our next class, you give me 5 alternative ways of saying modern medicine in the English language. Find at least 3 synonyms to the word modern or to the expression modern medicine, because there are quite a lot of repetitions, right? Instead of counting the number of modern medicine in the essay, the teacher should have actually maybe given a little task, right? and like given this task to a learner to think of synonyms and show it to the teacher next time they see them, right? Consider carefully your ideas. Is it helpful? What does it mean to consider carefully your ideas? How should I consider them? What should I do with my ideas, right? I've considered, and this is what the result of my consideration. What's wrong? The more specific we are, the more helpful our comments are, because from this comment it's not really clear what the problem is, right? So it is not specific, it does not look personalized, and obviously we have detected in the 3 lines, 2.5 lines of teacher comment, we have detected some mistakes, a mistake, right? And this is quite a major mistake, right? So this feedback is definitely not a model to follow. And one more, George, good try. There are some clever ideas, but you should stick to them more clearly. Try to find as many synonyms as possible in the case of modern medicine. Pay more attention to the grammar, good choice of linking words. Try to do your best next time, and I'm sure you'll success. Might be honest, I would agree that it is well balanced, right? Some nice ideas, though not quite flexible, right? Quite repetitive when it comes to the use of the word modern medicine, right? Some problems with grammar. Is it constructive? Not quite. Pay more attention to grammar. How helpful is that? Okay, I will pay more attention. But how can I make my grammar more accurate, right? You should try to find as many synonyms as possible. Why as many synonyms as possible? Doesn't this instruction seem misleading? Why as many as possible? Try to find a couple of synonyms, right? Could be a more reasonable suggestion, a more reasonable action plan, right? So definitely it's not quite specific, which is the reason for it not being quite constructive, right? But it is personalized, right? And what about errors? Well, it's actually erroneous, right? Have you detected any errors over here? Well, there are quite a few, but for example, pay more attention to the grammar. Well, the definite article is not necessary over here to grammar in general, right? And try to do your best next time, and I'm sure you will success. Well, obviously there is a problem with the word form, right? The verb from the noun to success is actually to succeed, right? And I'm sure you will succeed. So again, in the short comment, and this is a real teacher comment, in a short comment like that, a couple of mistakes is already too much, right? Again, this is the model, and this comment will stay in, imagine this comment will stay in the copybook of our learner. They might actually address it as a little reference later on in their process of their learning, and well, this is not something we want our learners to look at over and over again, right? Now it's time to talk of what you should do when you are faced with the task of writing final comment to your learner's writing, right? So as a little suggestion of what can be done, we can actually turn to these 3 questions offered in the book by Hattie and Timperley, The Power of Feedback, right? The book on which focuses on teacher feedback. So the questions are: where am I going? How am I going? And where to next? So it's a good approach to make sure that your feedback answers these 3 questions, right? So in your feedback, you should probably let your, well, it is a good idea to let your student know what the aim is in their subsequent pieces of writing or in their makeover, how this aim can be attained, right? So little action plan, what can be done to make it better and to achieve this aim, and where to next, right? So once, what activities need to be undertaken to make better progress, right? And yeah, so these are the steps which we might follow, right, when assessing student writing, especially using assessment criteria, right? It's obviously very important to refer to the assessment criteria per se, right, or specifications to the course, just to make sure that this piece of writing actually meets the requirements or the assessment criteria, right? It's very important to look at the question very carefully, right, to have a careful look, because very often teachers, this is what I've come across in my experience, they assess piece of writing without being very attentive to the task per se, and sometimes the fact that this or that piece of writing does not quite match the task remains, well, unnoticed. So this is very important. We should focus on the individual needs of our learners and maybe on their individual characteristics and on the progress that they need to make, right? And well, try to think of them within this whole well, process of learning of the class per se, right? Try to focus on your learners as a part of the whole class and as individuals, right? And try to think, well, project their personal progress, right? That should be made and how it can be made given their, well, characteristics, right? The characteristics of their, well, piece of writing, right? And it might also be a good idea to focus on the lessons learned as a backdrop against which this feedback is given, right? Whether these learners actually do, your learners actually do apply to practice whatever is learned in class, right? So, how do we make our feedback well balanced? Now, I've mentioned multiple times that you should keep your feedback well balanced, but sometimes, well, it might be quite an overwhelming task, right? To actually read the whole piece of writing and like try to be selective, right? To highlight positives and negatives. Now, to make sure that the feedback is well balanced, it's actually important to just get used to marking not only mistakes but also something that is really good. Now, it might be actually our cultural feature, but very often when everything is good, we might actually perceive it as the way it should be, but when something is not very good, we might actually start like saying something about it, right? This might not be like the best approach to take when it comes to giving feedback. Just develop that habit, even when marking the text per se, marking something that is good too, not only the mistakes. And it should be selective. So once you've highlighted positive and negatives, you might actually circle to yourself, or maybe even in the very piece of writing, what are those 2, 3, 4 things I'm going to focus on in the actual piece of writing. And now, well, we are going to actually give a comment to a sample piece of writing right now together. So I'll give you about 1 minute to have a look at the task. This is a typical state exam языке task for an essay. Well, will you please very quickly consider the question, well, have a look, read through the question itself, and then we're going to have a look at the sample piece of writing. Alright, so the question is, some people think that the best way of traveling the best way of traveling is by plane. So this is the statement, right, that our learners should agree or disagree with, write their arguments, write counter-arguments, refute those counter-arguments, and yeah, write a little conclusion, right? The plan for the essay is quite typical, right? Make an introduction where you state your opinion, express your personal opinion with 2-3 reasons to support it, express an opposing opinion and give 1-2 reasons, explain why you do not agree with this opposing opinion, and make a conclusion restating your position. Now, you can see this sample piece of writing, this sample essay, and I'm going to give you 3 minutes to read this essay, and you might actually want to pause this video. If 3 minutes is not enough, you might always hit the pause button and take as much time as you need, and I strongly recommend that you pull out a piece of paper and actually maybe take notes of the strengths and weaknesses of this piece of writing from your point of view. You have about 3 minutes to read this essay. The same, and I highlighted the following strengths about this piece of writing. So, well, there is quite a good introduction overall. That's what has been detected. So there is a little, introducing, the sentence introducing the problem, right? Nowadays traveling is an important part of our life. Just well, just a very general, right, introduction to the topic. There are those who agree with this opinion. Well, many people prefer to travel by plane, others do not. So there is this presentation of two existing points of view and, well, a nice phrase in which the learner outlines, well, a little plan of this essay, right? In this essay, there are two arguments, right, given in favor of air travel, and these are that it is quite fast and quite comfortable, right, traveling by plane, and there are, well, the structure is quite clear, right? The text is organized in, well, is written in, well, 5 quite clear paragraphs, right? Well, in the second one, there is, well, a position of a learner with some arguments in favor of that position. We're going to talk about it later on, like the thesis statement per se, right? There is a paragraph with some counter arguments, a paragraph in which the learner refutes those counter arguments, right? I cannot agree with this opinion because, well, obviously in conclusion, there is a conclusion. We're going to talk about it in a minute, and there are some nice linkers, right? First of all, secondly, moreover, personally, however. So this text, the ideas do look quite well organized even within paragraphs. Now, do you have any criticism in terms of the content and the structure? Now I've been commenting only on the content and the structure of this piece of writing. We're going to touch upon the language later on. So do we have any, well, criticism over here? Probably the way students' opinion is formulated does not quite match the essay question, right? So personally, I think that traveling by air is very popular now, but the question is whether it's the best way of traveling or not. Now, given the fact that the arguments per se, they do kind of prove that air travel is quite a good piece of writing, so I would attribute this problem to just like the problem of formulating, stating your, like, our learner's opinion, because the arguments per se, they do not prove whether the air travel is popular or not, but they rather prove why this is a good way of traveling, right? So arguments per se are okay, counter arguments are okay, but just the wording chosen by our learner to formulate their opinion is not okay, right? Because in the way it is formulated over here, personally, I think that air travel, traveling by air is very popular now. It does not quite match the essay question, right? Personally, I think that air travel is a wonderful way of traveling, right? Of going to far off, getting to far off destinations, right? Can be more accurate. So, not all counter arguments are refuted, right? What are the counter arguments here? That the tickets are really, plane tickets are really very expensive, and that some people are afraid of flying, right? So we can, well, to stay on budget, right? And find cut price tickets, right? So this is, well, one of the counter arguments is refuted, but so modern innovations allow you to fly comfortably and with all the comforts and safe. Well, safety, this does not actually prove anything that has been, well, this does not actually serve to refute one of the counter arguments stated in the preceding paragraph, right? It's just an introduction of a new idea which should not be done at this stage of writing an essay, right? It can be a nice, well, modern innovation led to fly comfortably and with all, well, comforts and safety, it can be like rewarded a little bit, and it can make a part of our learner's position, but it definitely does not serve to refute counter arguments, right? So the fact that some people are actually afraid of flying is not refuted over here, right? Or at least maybe this is what our learner attempted to do, but they did not have sufficient language resource to do that, right? Maybe they meant that nowadays technologies have developed to a point that they might actually ensure safety on board the plane, and airplanes are one of the safest ways of traveling, right? So yeah, there is definitely some work needed, right, on that bit of within this piece of writing, right? And well, the conclusion is quite problematic here too, because again, if you remember the plan for an essay, what we should do in conclusion is actually, and we might actually have a look at our student book forward, right? And there is always a nice plan for an essay. So in conclusion, we should restate, our learners should restate their position. Obviously, the position is not restated over here, and well, everyone chooses what they like most, and there are a lot of means of transport at the moment, a bit too general, right? So it's very important to once again restate your thesis statement, right? Your position, and maybe even like very briefly mention why you think so, right? So conclusion should actually be a little summary of the content of the essay, which is not over here, right? And again, some linkers, well, this is a minor one, right? But linkers like but or so are not characteristic of a formal piece of writing, which an essay, an argumentative essay is, right? They are more suitable for informal piece of writing. What about the language? So I did highlight some nice vocabulary units used by our learner. They are quite ambitious. So first of all, air travel, there is a nice synonym, air travel, traveling by air, right? So at least some flexibility over here, right? And there are some nice vocabulary units from the topic of air travel, right? The cabin crew, they walk up and down the aisle bringing meals and drinks. Now, even if this sentence is borrowed from a text or like adapted from a text, especially maybe if it's like an essay to practice essay writing skills, there is nothing bad about it, right? It just looks very nice. And probably our learner will just remember that phrase and use it skillfully and naturally in their speaking and writing, right? Cut price tickets, turbulence, some nice vocabulary units. As for some problems, linguistic problems, well, there are a couple of spelling mistakes that have been detected, right? Traveling by plane, right? The word plane is misspelled, which is, well, misfortune, right? Some mistakes in the verb use, right? I prefer not to traveling, but like traveling by plane, right? Or, well, you people are afraid not to fly, but in this context probably of flying, right, by plane, and there are some problems with word formation, for example, safety instead of safe, right? In the second argument here, secondly, in a big airliner with a cabin crew looking after you, well, obviously an important bit of this sentence, including like a verb actually is missing, right? So some syntactic problems, you have a sleep, well, you might have a sleep, right? Or you can actually sleep and relax. And well, there is some ambitious attempt at well, formulating the benefits of flying, of traveling by plane, right? You can like just listen to some music, but through the headphones, but it's not quite clear what the student meant to all passengers, maybe like in a way that nobody else, well, can hear what you're listening, like what music you're listening to, or you can just listen to music in your headphones and like just not hear what's going on right around, you don't hear other passengers, not quite clear. So some problems with the language actually impede understanding, right? And we know that like if some problems actually, some mistakes impede understanding, these are considered to be like major mistakes, right? So how do we, what do we do next? Having detected some strengths and weaknesses, both in terms of the content and in terms of the language, we might actually, well, write them all down and think of what we might want to focus on in our final comment. Now, I will give you about 5 minutes. If you need some more time, you might again hit the pause button and take as much time as you want, but I'll leave you with the original text of this essay, and I'll ask you to write a little comment, your final comment, your message to the student as a result of us, well, you and us together assessing this piece of writing and highlighting positive and negative aspects of this piece of writing. You have about 5 minutes to do that, and I'll share what I have written, what I will have written. So the comment I left to this learner looks like that. Dear George, Your essay has a very clear 5-paragraph structure, and the effective use of linking words makes it flow logically and smoothly. I also appreciate that you have used some nice words from the topic of air travel, for example, the cabin crew, turbulence, cut price tickets, etc. Good job. For the makeover, well, the second draft, right, I would suggest that you reformulate your opinion, which you give in the very beginning of the second paragraph, as it does not quite match the essay question. In this essay, you discussed whether it is true that air travel is the best way of traveling and not how popular it is nowadays. The concluding paragraph needs being rewritten too, as it does not quite summarize the content of your essay right now. I am also asking you to think of some alternative linkers to substitute so and but in the beginning of a sentence, as these are more suitable for informal writing. Please correct the language I have marked within the text, let's imagine, and make sure you show your work to me again before our next class. I'm looking forward to reading your second draft. Best, TA, my little initials, right? So, is this comment genuine? Well, now having read the essay per se, it's for you to decide, but I tried to be quite genuine over here. I did actually genuinely highlighted positive and negatives, and I tried to actually mention the negatives, which I've written for you over here in my comment, right, as well as some of the positives, which are over here, right, and the ambitious use of the vocabulary. And it does look like a little sandwich. I think I start with some positives, then I give some criticism, and then I wrap it up again, well, with a little kind of like comment that I'm really looking forward to reading their second draft. I'm giving actually the task to them that they should work through the language inaccuracies that I highlighted for them within the text, right? And they should show it to me. So I tried to keep it quite personalized, right? I addressed my learner by name. Let's imagine it is George. I wrote my little, well, concluding thing, right? Best, my initials. So it does look like a little message. I try to keep the criticism, well, this whole actually paragraph specific. So instead of saying nice vocabulary, I actually highlight what words are nice, right? Which vocabulary units are very well used, right, are on point over here. That might actually make your learner to feel a little bit good, right, to feel good and a little bit more confident, right? So these are the words that I particularly liked. Good job. Especially I did try to consider the background, right, of for the production of this piece of writing. Probably we covered the topic of air travel, right, and they received a task to write an essay. So I did try to keep this this criticism constructive, right? So I actually, instead of saying no very good statement in which like you formulate your position, or you do not formulate your position over here, right? I actually help my learner, well, to understand what's wrong with that, right? That it does not quite, like your thesis statement matches this question, this essay question, but the actual essay question is quite different. So I tried to be specific over here, and I explained that the conclusion should be rewritten and why it should be done, right? Yeah, let's imagine I also mentioned that but and so are not quite suitable for this piece of writing, and I explain why. I don't say never use them. You shouldn't use but and so in the beginning of a sentence. No, they can, but not in this type of writing, right? And I try to keep it well balanced, personalized, and hopefully there are no mistakes over here. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it useful, and I will see you in my next video, and please write down your final comments in the comment section below, so we could maybe compare what we all have got. Thank you.